don't want to be remiss in praying for our nation and for our county. Lord, I pray for this meeting, that everything would go decently and in order, and that, Lord, the right decisions could be made that would be honoring to you and the best for everyone involved. Father, the thing that's most in my heart today is I pray that there would be an ever-increasing awareness amongst our people how much we need you. I love you, Lord. Thank you so much for loving us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Would you join me in the pledge to our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, this time, do we have any agenda changes?
I move that we approve the agenda as amended with the following change: move land use hearings to the end of the meeting after board planning.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda. Do we have any items on the consent agenda? We do? So, then we don't need more? We don't need more? Good. All right, elected officials, department, staff reports. Do we have any staff reports of any kind? This time, no? Good, all right. Open public comment. Now, if I could go over this initially. We have, under discussion and land use, you'll have the opportunity to comment on those specific items. This open public comment is for things outside of the agenda or any other considerations that you have. So, at this point, is there anybody who would like to have a comment? Frank. If you go to the podium, please state your name and address and kind of the topic.
Anyway, my comment is that all too often I see a lack of civility. I think it's important that we have an opportunity to petition our political leaders, but we should do it with civility and try to achieve a reasonable solution to the problems. And that's one main point I just see too often, not only in national politics, but in other county politics, that we get hypersensitive at times. So, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. This time, do we have anybody else?
Yes.
We have Arlene.
Good morning, Commissioners. I want to just make a little comment about communication, and I know it's probably another one that people think is a buzzword. All of you ran on wonderful platforms of, being open to citizens and communicating. I joked with Chris that he's policy about communication or about the BOCC and communicating with citizens and things like that. Sometimes we send emails or phone calls and they are into the great void. Sometimes we play phone tag. Sometimes we send an email and we get a contact, but we don't get the follow-up, maybe the document or the information that we're seeking. But today I'd like to embarrass Commissioner Christopher Richardson to tell him that in every contact I've made with him, he has returned my call, he has answered my email, he has provided me information, and that doesn't go unnoticed. And I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners, and good morning. This morning I'd like to briefly address the new organization chart. It appears, I think we need some more explanation on this before you take any further action with respect to the hiring that's contemplated in that chart. It's really not clear what the basis for the decisions adding the new layers of bureaucracy are. Basically what happens in that chart is you're contemplating adding 2 assistant county managers, one for public works, one for administration. We've seen the posting, which closed after a short time, for the public works position, a salary of $85,000 to $100,000 plus benefits, which is going to add a fair amount on top of that. I assume that the administration position, the other assistant, will be paid a similar salary at a similar cost. And there's also a position for a public information officer, which is actually an idea that's been kicking around the county for a while. Salary's not yet been announced for that. Now, there's a number of questions that are raised by this that I think need to be answered. First of all, why do Elbert County taxpayers need to pay for a ministry of propaganda? It would be cheaper for you commissioners to hold regular town hall meetings and to hold some night meetings where hold them on a regular basis so that a broader spectrum of the public can attend on a regular basis. Also, where's the money for this going to come from? We're facing challenges from the Gallagher Amendment, and I know there's claims that this is going to be that these potential reductions under Gallagher are going to be offset by rising property values and perhaps from the wind farm. Maybe that'll happen, but still, where's the money going to come from? Which budget and which services are going to be cut to allow for these extra employees, this extra layer of bureaucracy? Finally, why does a county this size need assistant county managers? There are similarly sized counties in Colorado without assistant county managers. There are similarly sized counties without public information officers. There are much bigger counties without assistant county managers. Arapahoe County, if I look at their org chart, doesn't even appear to have a county manager. El Paso has a single chief financial and administrative officer under a county administrator. So I think what we need to know is what analysis went into this before you proceed further. Thank you very much.
Mr. Brown, thank you. What I would say is, give us the opportunity to meet with us after, or a time when we can discuss a lot of those things.
May I respond to that?
I'm just offering the time after the meeting, or
No, Commissioner Wilcox, you said that before in response to my comments, and I appreciate it. You're really very open about that sort of thing. And to echo something, some praise from Marlene from Commissioner Richardson, you've always been very good about returning calls when somebody contacts you, or actually call in person. But my concern isn't just me, it's the public at large. And while I'm happy to talk to you, that doesn't do the job for the public. And that's how you communicate. You don't have to pay people to do that for you. Thank you.
thank you.
We've heard this comment about where does the money come from several times, and people don't realize that we pay quite a bit of third-party consulting fees, and something like we have an outside accountant help us get our stuff ready for audits. It's about $70,000 to $75,000 a year. If we have an administrative person there that has the proper talents, skills, and education, there will be there's the big offset to that already. We pay outside engineers for doing a lot of work for us. One of the things that in the job description for the public works person, you'll notice that we're expecting an engineer. So a big chunk of the offset cost will be bringing those services in-house rather than using third parties. The organizational chart that you're talking about is the basis or one of the components of our strategic planning process. We've got to have a chart like that so we know where we might be in 3 4, 5 years. The question of titles I find amusing. And the reason I find it amusing, it's not the title that's important, it's the function. We need people that can do administrative things, do accounting, understand how all of these things integrate into the process. The assistant manager title, the reason I find it amusing is we want talent. We want people to apply for these jobs. And the title, well, we can't compete on a salary, but we might be able to, the title might make a difference for somebody that's trying to enhance their resume. I don't know, but the whole point is, the title is not the important thing, to me anyway. It's the function, it's what we expect the outcomes to be.
Well, if I may,
This is not a debate. I answered your question.
you don't want, you're not allowing me to respond?
This is not a debate.
I'm not trying to debate with you, I'd just like to make a couple of points, if I may.
Your time is up.
If we could, we're here for discussion afterwards, and any time in the office. Can we go on with additional comments? Anybody else? Go ahead, if you could, come to the podium, please.
Paula Wilderman, 47073 Silver Fir, Parker. If it's appropriate, I'd actually just like to make a comment regarding the master plan. If that's appropriate right now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a member of the Planning Commission, and as citizens know, we have been tasked with revamping and setting forth a new master plan for Elbert County. And I would like to invite all citizens to the first public meeting, which is April 26th, that's a Wednesday. It will be held here at the fairground. It's from 6 to 8:30 p.m. The master plan is obviously critical to Elbert County to plan the direction that the county wants to move forward with the growth of the county. We have, as the Planning Commission, we have hired a consultant to help with this. Obviously, no member of the Planning Commission has the skill set required to write a master plan. That's going to incorporate everything that's required for a master plan of the county. We have hired a company called Design Workshop that will guide the writing of the master plan. They have a website that is available right now for the county to visit. It's albertcountycompplan.com. You can go to that website right now and visit what the master plan will encompass. What you'll hear is the comprehensive plan or the master plan. It's all the same thing. I know in 1996, when the last master plan was written, it was called a master plan. They're now called comprehensive plans. It's all the same thing. But again, it's albertcountycompplan.com, and that is something that the Design Workshop will take care of. So you can go there, get information regarding the master plan or the comp plan. There are surveys there that will be taken. So even though you can't come to the meeting on April 26th, again at the fairgrounds from 6 to 8:30 p.m., you can still go to the website and put your input in, although we strongly encourage you to come to the meeting on April 26th. Again, here at the fairgrounds. They also have ways to get your input. They'll have surveys, that they have real-time surveys. So they ask a question, everyone will have a little remote control for you to give your answer. It's not vocal, so it's not where the loudest voices get heard. Everyone gets equal input. So they ask a question, you answer yes, no with the device that's in your hand. So everyone's input is taken. So again, April 26th, we want you to be there, 6 to 8:30 p.m. here. So spread the news around. I also have flyers that you can take in the back of the room. So tell 10, 20 of your closest friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, at this time, we'll go on to discussion items. We have couple on the agenda. First, we have a presentation from the state engineers, water department, and regarding the Denver water basin. So I believe, do they have a presentation there? Or is this and this is Mr. Ryan, Kevin Ryan?
Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, and I'm sorry. If I wander away from the mic, somebody flag me down and make sure that I can be heard. My name is Kevin Ryan. I work at the Division of Water Resources, also known as the State Engineer's Office. We are the regulatory agency in Colorado that administers water in the state, and that includes non-tributary Denver Basin groundwater. I'm the Deputy State Engineer. I'm accompanied today by Carmen Armstrong. She's a professional engineer on one of our water supply teams that specializes, among other things, in administration of Denver Basin groundwater, particularly when it comes to well permitting, water court adjudication, evaluation of Denver Basin groundwater as it's used in subdivisions. That is her role. So she is going to take a large part of the discussion today and lead you through it to help with that education. That is our objective today, is to talk about non-tributary groundwater in the Denver Basin and how that's administered. I know you all have bigger discussions to have today and in the future, but our narrow objective is to help everyone with that understanding of the Denver Basin Groundwater's administration. And I'll invite the commissioners, as we're talking, please interrupt if you have questions specifically on something we're talking about. With that, I'll dive right in, and in order for me to really help you understand the administration of non-tributary groundwater in the Denver Basin, it's important that you understand more in general the way water in the state is administered in general, just so you can contrast non-tributary groundwater to the rest of the groundwater and the surface water of the state. Just to give you that context for who we are again and what we do, the Department of Natural Resources is a state agency that reports directly to the governor, and within that Department of Natural Resources, the kinds of things that you would expect, the regulation of the use of our natural resources, Division of Water Resources, Parks and Wildlife, Oil and Gas Conservation, Colorado Water Conservation Board, different agency from us, Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. So we have these agencies that regulate the natural resources in our state, and we are that Division of Water Resources. The major responsibilities we have: water administration, that's our bread and butter. That's been our bread and butter since 1881 when the Office of the State Engineer was created. And that is about allocating this scarce resource, water, to users in a legal system. We also do dam safety oversight, water well permitting. We oversee interstate compacts. We have a hydrographic stream measurement program, public information. So we do all those things. But today we're talking about water administration, specifically in the Denver Basin context. Just to give you a size of the magnitude of water administration, a feel for the magnitude of water administration in Colorado, there are over 173,000 decreed water rights, operating with over 105,000 structures, 250,000 permitted wells in the state. And all that is for maximizing the beneficial use of water. That's what we're trying to do here. What we're going to talk about today, and this will be a combination of Carmen and I, give you an intro into water in Colorado, again, so you understand the big picture, and then get into groundwater administration, specifically Denver Basin, and how that influences the way we do well permitting, the way we look at water rights, and then, as I said, ask questions as we go if you have them, but feel free to say them for the end too. I'm going to give you a quick intro to water in Colorado, and it seems very basic, but it's a very important concept to keep in mind. If we look at the state, without any man-made infrastructure, without the highways, without the towns, without the boundaries, it's very easy to see that we are a state with headwaters of 4 major river basins flowing out of the state. Matter of fact, that's why the Congress drew the territorial boundaries around Colorado like they did. They wanted to protect that. This is, of course, in the 1850s and 1860s, protect that from We had a lot going on in the country then, and to protect those headwaters. So that's why we see the South Platte, we see the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, and all the Colorado River and its tributaries flowing out of the state. To look at what's really going on, again, without any influence from people, we had that hydrologic cycle. We had snow and still do have snow falling in the central mountains, and we have rain, and it flows out of the state, and it experiences some infiltration or evaporation as it goes, but we're really, all that water is originating in Colorado. And that's an important concept if we're going to talk about administration of a very complicated water rights system and allocation system. This is just a larger view. Water out of Colorado does flow and eventually touch 19 states and, of course, Mexico. The way we allocate this water, then, and this is the important point I want to make, is through something called our prior appropriation system. Not gratified. That should raise hands. Most everybody's heard of that prior appropriation system. Really, it's based on our Constitution, and it says the waters of the state, they're a public resource, subject to allocation according to priority of appropriation. That means first in time, first in right. So as people get water rights decreed in the court, they attach a date to that, and it's just literally standing in line like we've depicted at the bottom. You might have an 1890 date for your water right, which is a nice senior water right. If you've got a 2009 or even a 1955, perhaps even a 1903 water right, there are times when those are going to be junior, and in an over-appropriated basin like the South Platte, which we are in here, or the Arkansas, there are going to be a lot of times in the year when you don't get water and you'll be curtailed. And really, right now I'm talking about surface water. I'm talking about water flowing in rivers and streams, comes from the snow melt in the spring. But we need to focus a little more on groundwater administration because we're really here, as I said, to talk about Denver Basin non-tributary groundwater. And again, to do that, let's look at all groundwater quickly. Beginning in 1900 or so, a little bit before, on through the 1960s, well pumping was allowed pretty much without any administration. It was just regarded as a separate source of water from surface water. So we had all types of groundwater being pumped, but over time there was increasing attention to the fact that groundwater really is connected to surface water. And to give the exaggerated example, picture a flowing stream, and if you go into the bank 10, 20 feet away from it and construct a well and start pumping that well, you can see that you're going to have an impact on that stream. That same impact, to a lower degree and to a more protracted degree, is going to happen as you get hundreds of feet or maybe a mile or maybe miles away from the stream. So there was more attention being paid to that, but the law had not caught up. And so the pumping was just happening and impacting streams. Now, there was a recognition of non-tributary groundwater. It wasn't a good quantified recognition, but it was a qualitative recognition that there are certain types of groundwater that are isolated from the stream, and water can be pumped from those aquifers without impacting the stream. Now, beginning in the 1970s, that tributary groundwater pumping that I talked about, that 10 feet or 1 mile from the stream, suddenly we had to address the impacts to the surface water. We incorporated groundwater administration into our surface water administration model, that being prior appropriation. And it really came to the point, if you're going to pump a well, you need to predict your impacts to the stream. And predict is not a fair word, it's a scientific analysis. Your impacts to the stream and replace them. That's done through augmentation plans, and that allowed us to continue well pumping with good, solid prior appropriation administration. But what about non-tributary groundwater? Because remember, that's isolated from the surface water, and what we really needed to do is get a better definition and approach to allocation, and that's what we did beginning in the 70s. So groundwater administration is really this combination of looking at a decreed water right that's done through the water courts, and a well permit that allows that well to be pumped, and that's administrative, that's through our office, And then an understanding of what type of groundwater. Is it tributary, non-tributary, maybe designated groundwater? All those go into how we administer Denver Basin groundwater, or groundwater in general. So the types of groundwater we have, there are legally 4 types of groundwater in Colorado. We have tributary groundwater, non-tributary, then Denver Basin, which is a special case of non-tributary, and designated groundwater. And by the way, I noticed a couple people taking pictures, which I'm really happy you're engaged in that. I want to just say for convenience, we can email or leave this presentation to people, so and it can certainly be publicly available because that would be much handier for you all, and this is good public information. But we have those 4 types of groundwater. Today our focus will be on Denver Basin, but you can see we've got Elbert County depicted here and all the streams flowing through it, and a couple other boundaries. In Elbert County, as far as tributary groundwater, very small out here on the eastern end, because, and let's talk about tributary real quick. I'm going to go through this quickly because I described it for you, but picture this alluvial material deposited tens of thousands of years ago, and it's sandy and gravelly, and it's right next to the flowing stream. And because of this higher elevation, you constantly got water flowing into that stream through the ground. And then we put a well in, and that well starts pumping. You can see how groundwater then goes toward the well. That's going to have either an immediate or a more protracted effect on the stream by lowering the amount of water in the stream. So that is the effect, the reduction effect of water flowing in the stream. That's important when we talk about tributary groundwater. But we're really going to talk about non-tributary groundwater more, and again, with the same boundaries of Elbert County. Non-tributary groundwater in the Denver Basin exists in this area, very large area. And then I'll just touch on designated groundwater. Designated groundwater is an important component in Colorado water law. We have 8 designated basins in Colorado that are all pretty much out on the eastern plains here. And of course, today we're talking about this location right here. Again, the Cuyahoga designated basin and the Upper Big Sandy designated basin. So 8 designated basins, and that's a little bit of a geopolitical or a geo-administrative boundary where it's based on geography. It's based on the fact that there's really little or no surface water in that area, and that groundwater is the primary source of water. It's administered by not the water courts like the rest of the water in the state, but by the Colorado Groundwater Commission. And there are different statutes and different rules. There's some overlap with the designated basins and Denver Basin. But and I think for today's purposes, conceptually, it's going to look a lot the same. So again, here's where we have designated groundwater inside and outside the Denver Basin. And I'm going to move ahead then to the Denver Basin, and again, like Carlin, as she's a specialist in this, let her describe more about the Denver Basin and its administration.
There's a light. Alright, so what is Denver Basin? Denver Basin is a series of geologic formations. I like to personally keeps cutting off. I personally like to think of it as a several tiered chocolate cake. You have I personally like to think of it as a several-tiered chocolate cake. You have layers of spongy material that holds a lot of water, it's very moist. And then you have layers of frosting in between that keep those spongy layers separate. Those spongy layers are your water-bearing formations. And you have 4 of them. You have the Dawson Formation, the Denver Formation, the Arapahoe, and then the Laramie Fox Hills Formation. And each one of those formations is separated by a layer of frosting or a layer of clay that keeps them from encountering each other. It keeps them separate and confined to their own layer. Now, where is the Denver Basin? It's over 5,700 square miles of these underground water formations, ranging from almost up to Greeley, down past Colorado Springs, out to Lyman, and out west almost to Boulder. It's a really large swath of area in the Denver metro region that has this spongy water source available underneath it. Now, this ranges from almost near the surface down to several thousands of feet, depending on where you are. Sometimes you're going to be really near the top, and the Denver Formation is going to be really close to you. Or you could have to drill down several thousands of feet to get down to a deeper aquifer. The Denver Basin is what we consider a non-renewable resource. It does not recharge nearly as quickly as we take water out of it. You'll see, this is kind of tough for audience to see, but you have a very small percentage of recharge that does come in from the edges of the aquifer. But really, these formations were put down millions of years ago. They're separated from the overlying land system. They're separated from your surface water supply. And once they go away, they're not going to come back. There are some areas that are working to artificially recharge the Denver Basin. Some areas, Highlands Ranch, Summit, the city and county of Denver is looking at the possibility of recharging the Denver Basin, and they're really looking at it as a way of having underground water storage. They don't have any evaporative loss that you have at a surface reservoir. But unless you artificially put water down for storage so you can take it back up later, once that water is gone, it's really not going to come back. So we've gone over a lot of this, but why is the Denver Basin different? Well, it's a geologic formation with limited connectivity to the overlying land. It's a non-renewable resource. And in a lot of areas, the Denver Basin is what we consider non-tributary. It has absolutely no connection to the stream within the definition of the statute, which can be a really big advantage to people, because if you have non-tributary water, you don't have to go to water court or to the Groundwater Commission and get one of those pesky replacement plans. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money. It can save you a lot of resources if you have non-tributary water available. So, because of the uniqueness of the Denver Basin, we administer it differently from other areas of groundwater and surface water in the state. So, brief history. Everything has a regulatory history in groundwater administration. Before 1963, groundwater that was not tributary to the stream was considered developed water. And so you would have these really big municipalities drill these wells and be able to pump however much water they wanted. They'd have this unlimited resource out of the Denver Basin. That was really starting to concern people, that they had all of this free water that they're taking from all of their neighbors and all of their constituents. So in 1969, they started forming rules about how you can withdraw Denver Basin groundwater so that it lasts a longer time. They started recognizing, this is a non-renewable resource. You need to have an augmentation plan for water outside the Denver Basin. Within the Denver Basin, we don't want them taking water beyond what's under an individual property so that other people don't have access to the water as well. So 1973 was a non-tributary groundwater law, and 1985, another major groundwater law impacting the Denver Basin. First one, 1973, Senate Bill 213 was a pretty big point. So previously, you had all these municipalities taking a whole bunch of water from big wells in the Arapahoe Formation or wherever, pumping lots of water from a whole region. Well, as of 1973, the legislature said, no, you can't do that anymore. You can only take out the amount of water that's available under your property. You cannot take out the amount of water that's available under your neighbor's property. That's for your neighbor to take out if they want to. Not only that, but we recognize it's a non-renewable resource. And so we're only gonna let you take out so much water in any given year, so that if you pumped every year, that aquifer would last 100 years. So while we know it's not renewable, we are gonna try and stretch how long it will last. So that's where you can pump 1% every year, because that would allow the aquifer to last 100 years. However, we had no formal definition of what non-tributary meant. When do you need an augmentation plan and when do you not? So in 1985, between 73 and 85, you have all these people disagreeing on how much water is under their property and not able to determine whether or not they need a plan for augmentation for their well. So 1985, legislature came in with Senate Bill 5, defined non-tributary groundwater for the very first time. This gets really technical really fast. Non-tributary, if your pumping impacts the river more than 1/10 of 1% of how much you pump, it's tributary. If it's less than 1/10 of 1% of your pumping impacts the river, it's non-tributary. And this gets really technical, but by them quantifying that, all of a sudden we could model what happens. We can model what the Denver Basin looks like, model what wells pump, and determine what parts of the Denver Basin are tributary and non-tributary. So they also gave the state engineer rulemaking authority to go investigate how much water is actually in the Denver Basin. Nobody can agree about this. So the state engineer went and looked at geophysical logs from all over the Denver Basin and developed maps that outline how thick the aquifer is and how much water is available in each of these different aquifers so that everybody's on the same playing field. So starting in 1985, everybody started playing by the same rules, same maps, and we've really been operating under that same system pretty much ever since. All right, so you guys have been hearing tributary, non-tributary. We've talked about the definition of this. I'm a very visual person, so I like pictures more. But it's really about the interaction with the surface water supply. So we have this nice stream here, and you install a well right next to the river, like Kevin talked about. You pump that well, and that well is going to reduce the amount of water available in the stream. That's a tributary well. Now, what happens when you have a Denver Basin situation? So here's your layer of frosting, your clay layer that separates the aquifer from the rest of the system up here. And you put in a well that's really, really far away. This isn't a good sense of scale. Let's say this well is like way over here next to Kevin's head. It's really far away. And you pump that well. Well, it's going to take water from down here, but will it ever impact the river? No, not according to the statutory definition. It's not going to impact the river. So this water then is non-tributary. That's the basic difference of what you're looking at with Denver Basin. Now, what happens though if you want to put in a well where the Denver Basin intersects a stream? If you put in a well up here, still in the Denver Basin, but really close to the surface, or to the overlying surface stream, and you pump that well, does that impact the stream? Well, yeah. It doesn't meet that definition of non-tributary anymore, but it's still in the Denver Basin. So it's something kind of in between tributary and non-tributary. And so, of course, my favorite definition in the entire book of statutes, yes, I live in a book of statutes, not non-tributary water. So oftentimes, if you're talking about Denver Basin water, if you're in a non-tributary area of the Denver Basin, you don't need any sort of augmentation plan or replacement plan. But if you're in a not non-tributary area of the Denver Basin, you may still need replacement water. How do we keep this all straight? Because if your head doesn't hurt by now, I don't know. It took me a long time to learn all of this, that's for sure. So that's really where those 1985 Denver Basin rules come in. They give us site-specific information about what's going on at any individual area. We have maps of how much water we think is under that specific parcel. We know whether that water under that parcel, in that aquifer, is non-tributary or not non-tributary. And we can issue permits and do determinations for the water court and for the groundwater commission based on that data. And so now we have these handy reports that tell us for this one parcel, how deep is the aquifer, what are your options, etc. So when we do a quantification of how much water is available under your property, we're looking just at that parcel. We're looking at not any neighbor's property. So you have one piece of land, we can't give you water for your neighbor's property. So we're going to be looking at the size of your parcel, how much water the aquifer will produce, how thick the aquifer is with water, and the 100-year aquifer life. And making sure that nobody who owned the land before you already took the water under your property. Because you can only give it out once, right? It's not coming back. So this landowner has a sole right to withdraw the water unless somebody else has already taken it. All right, again, visual aids, I'm way more visual. You have a 10-acre property, and we want to get a well permit for the Denver aquifer. So we look at the Denver aquifer under those 10 acres, and it's not the only aquifer, right? You have the Dawson and the Arapahoe and the Laramie Fox Hills around it, but we're just going to get a permit for the Denver. So, the Denver aquifers, according to our maps, about 500 feet thick. You have a range of 500 feet to complete your well. But even though the aquifer is actually 500 feet thick, the aquifer isn't fully saturated. This is where it's no longer really like a cake. Really, there are these lenses of sand in the aquifer. And those are the portions of the aquifer that have all the water. So when you look at those lenses, really your saturated thickness of that aquifer is just 225 feet. So when we issue permits, we're not looking at the total depth of the aquifer, we're looking at these sands to see how much water is actually in the aquifer. And then from that, once we have that saturated thickness, then each year you get to take out 1% of that chunk of water. So for any math geeks in here, the Senate Bill 5 says that the specific yield is 17% in the Denver Formation. The saturated thickness is 225 feet, 10 acres. Denver Formation has 382 acre-feet of water underneath it on that 10-acre property. Now, because you can only take out 1% per year, that means if we're going to issue a well permit out there, or if somebody's going to get a water right, they're going to be limited to taking out 3.8 acre-feet of water per year. So it lasts 100 years. Now, I did mention exceptions of, when can you not get water on your property because somebody else already claimed it. And this is important to know this if you can't get water. So appropriations before 1973, those big cylindrical wells of people who have those grandfathered wells that took water before they were limited to just the water under their land. If you are part of a municipality, sometimes the municipality will claim all of your water because they're going to pump it for you and put it into your tap. If you're part of a subdivision water supply plan that relies on a specific aquifer, that water is designated to a subdivision, it can't be used for anything else. And if that water was previously adjudicated or had a different type of permit that quantified it, you have to get that water deeded to you to be able to withdraw it. So we keep maps of all of this. Every time somebody makes a claim on Denver Basin water, we draw it out. And so whenever we look at a property, we're looking at this. Here is, somebody adjudicated this water in a court case. Here's a subdivision water supply plan right here. And here's one of those big cylinders where somebody withdrew water before 1973, and so they didn't have to limit them to just the water under their property. So if I was to issue a permit right here, you would have to show me that somebody had deeded you water from that court case for me to be able to issue a permit on that property. All right, that's the sticky wicket of Denver Basin water in a nutshell. So I'm going to jump back out to broader-based well permitting just briefly, but before we go off of the specifics of Denver Basin, do you have any questions?
Not really a question, just a comment. Locally, for subdivision, we require proof of 300 years of water or 1/3%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you base that on your calculation.
that's a great point. So the statute says that we have to allocate water for just 100-year aquifer life, but some counties, in an effort to stretch how long the Denver Basin will last, have opted to require that you can only withdraw 1/300th of the water. So the water lasts 300 years instead of just 100 years. And Elbert County is one of those counties that has done that. So if you're a subdivision that's reliant on Denver Basin groundwater, they designed it so that you should have enough water for 300 years, assuming all of our maps are correct. Right, which is always the big unknown, is how good our data is, right? All right, so anything else? That's a great point. So I'm gonna break out to well permitting just briefly for a little bit more context, and then I'll hand it back to Kevin to talk about water rights. So in general, the state will issue two types of well permits: exempt or small capacity well permits, non-exempt or large capacity permits. They're synonymous with each other. Exempt small capacity permits are typically what you think of for your residential or small commercial and drinking and sanitary inside a 7-Eleven type situation. They're exempt from our prior appropriation system. It means that they don't have to consider whether they're going to impact the river. But it also means that we can only issue these permits in very limited situations, and that's often dependent on how the parcel was created, whether or not you qualify for this exemption. It's a great way to not have to go to water court, but it also means your uses of your well are going to be very limited. Non-exempt wells, on the other hand, are generally what you think of when you think of your big municipal wells or industrial wells or oil and gas water wells. There's really the potential there for any use, but it also means that it's administered in our water rights system, and so if you have a tributary well, you're going to need an augmentation plan, unless you have non-tributary water. Also, a lot of subdivisions that occurred after 1972 end up with these non-exempt permits, because a lot of subdivisions that happened after 1972 no longer qualify for exempt permits. So those are the primary pieces of lingo that you'll hear from our office: tributary, non-tributary, not non-tributary, and exempt and non-exempt permits. So there's your technical basis. With that, I'll hand it back to Kevin to talk about water rights.
Thanks, Carmen. And again, before she sits down, any other questions related to that? And we'll have time to bring that all together at the end with questions too. We started talking about water rights at the beginning, and we need to finish talking about water rights in our court system and how they play a role in allowing some of this water's use. Carmen just talked about well permits, and we need to contrast water right decrees with well permits. The decree, when we talk about that, it's going to be for maybe a priority water right, for some acknowledgement of a water right for Denver Basin water, or a plan of augmentation. Sometimes it's for changes of water rights. That's the big picture of what's happening in water court. But it is, a decree has to be issued by the water court. There are other states where a regulatory agency like ours has that authority to preside over water rights and grant them. Wyoming, for example, other states. Colorado is a water court-based state when it comes to those water rights. Now, water right is a property right. It can be conveyed to another party by a deed. But ultimately, you're going to need a well permit, Denver Basin water or other water. So, going back to Carla's discussion of well permits, a well permit, it's really two things. It's a permit to construct a well in the first place, because construction of a well is very important. So, it gives a driller the right to go out there and construct that well in the first place. But importantly, all the things Carla just talked about, the well permit also describes the way you can use that well, how much water you can take out, what you can use it for, that sort of thing. That's issued by our office, the Division of Water Resources, or the State Engineer's Office. A well permit does not give you a water right. Again, that's back here on the water right decree side. And you don't necessarily need a water right in many cases, especially those exempt well permit cases that Carla was talking about. Going back to our court system, for water. This is a district court. It was a function created by a 1969 act in the state legislature. It's a water court system that, as I said, adjudicates water rights for tributary, surface water, groundwater, and non-tributary groundwater, plans for augmentation. Now, let's get back to Elbert County. Where you're going to see this water court activity is if there's a need for non-tributary groundwater. Remember that's that water that's in a Denver Basin formation, but it's fairly close to the stream, so it doesn't meet that non-tributary standard. To pump, in many of the cases, like a subdivision, you'll need an augmentation plan in court. So the court has got the oversight and the ability to decree that. But also for water rights, as I said, surface water rights, spring ponds, diverting water from the river. And then the second bullet there, Denver Basin water. Even though, as Carlin described, as a landowner, you have the sole right to that amount of water underlying your land, many people choose to go to court and get the legal affirmation that they have that right. And there are functional and more practical bases for doing that too, because you may need an augmentation plan, or you may need to allocate water among members of a subdivision. So there are good practical bases for going to water court for your Denver Basin water too. And then, of course, outside the Denver Basin, if you need an exempt well and you need greater uses, then you may need to go to court too. Let's focus on adjudication of non-tributary groundwater. I touched on it. Again, it's the water court's formal acknowledgement or affirmation of what the law already says you have as a landowner. That is the right to the Denver Basin groundwater. The law calls it an in-court right. That's just a difficult legal word, but that in-court right means you have the statutory right. It hasn't been affirmed by the water court yet. Can that in-court right be taken away? Technically it could. The legislature could change water law. They change water law a lot. This, in my professional opinion, the legislature is not going to change that law to take the landowner's rights to their non-tributary groundwater away. That legislators are very averse to messing with people's property rights in that way, so I would not see that happening. But the adjudication does vest it. It does then make it your property right, something you can transfer just like any other water right. What is an augmentation plan in a nutshell? Remember, we talked about that non-tributary water. Like tributary water, it has an impact on the stream when you pump it. You're legally bound to make sure other water users on the stream aren't injured by your pumping. So what that augmentation plan does is it allows you to go to water court, describe how much your well is going to pump, where and when that pumping will impact the stream, which is using mathematical models and a lot of difficult groundwater modeling, and then describes your source of replacement water, how you're going to use another source of water to replace those impacts you had on the stream. That's, again, to protect those senior water rights. And just to give you some context, for smaller wells, often in subdivisions, somebody that has a non-evaporative septic system with a leach field, that water that goes out to their household use into the leach field, it gets back into the ground. It's the reverse of this depletion effect. It's going to put water back in the stream. So many augmentation plans in these small scale situations are very simple. They almost work on their own by virtue of your household use. An augmentation plan can be that simple. So it's not as daunting as it always might seem when you're in the Denver Basin. That is your drink through a fire hose on Denver Basin groundwater and administration. And again, we're very open to questions. I mentioned that we will make this available, this presentation available for you all to see. So you'll have that, but please, any questions would be just great.
Does anybody have any questions?
about today is, I mean, probably everybody in this room lives on a well, either their own personal well or a community well. We know it's a finite resource, so the concern is valid on water use, but, you know, when things come to us for decision, it's good to know. I mean, we want to base our decisions on facts, not fear, and I think your office with the modeling and all the work you do provides a good factual basis for the decisions we're making, so, you know, we don't have that expertise in-house, obviously, and the state makes that your responsibility, so, but again, it's just very important to us and those in this county that as we grow, and we will, and it's inevitable